Tom Masiero with Great American Mining.
Great American Mining. What company is that? Boy, mining, that is broad. I like that because what a lot of people don't understand is that the oil and gas industry is technically underneath the mining industry. So talk to me about what it is you guys do for a second, Tom.
Well, basically, we have started a kind of new project that focuses on targeting oil and gas producers, essentially working with them, taking their excess flare gas, instead of them flaring it or using, like an NGL setup, we take that gas for them, we mitigate it for them, we run it through generators with some light conditioning, and we use it to power these mobile data centers on site.
So it's a lot of emission management then, huh?
Right now, the current use case, specifically in the Bakken, is a flare mitigation kind of angle.
Okay.
Eventually, we want these folks, or we believe that these folks, if we share enough data with them and they kind of understand it, it's very much a black box right now. They'll see it as an alternative to a pipeline. We call it a digital pipeline. In terms of like how we think about it.
Yeah, I want to get through into the digital part of things because, doing a little bit of research on what you guys are doing. And of course, I saw the digital currency and Bitcoin and a few things like that. And I don't really understand a lot of that. So I just thought it'd be good to have you talk about the whole digital aspect of the oil and gas world right now, because it is changing pretty quick. And there's a lot of companies out there that are trying to figure out how to capitalize on this type of technology. And there's a few people doing some research and development. And I know you're one of them out there that actually has a few boxes out there. So explain the box, explain the digital part of this whole process.
Sure. So the boxes that we have, and there's a number of other, I would say, competitors to what we're doing. It's obviously a huge ecosystem as far as like the amount of supply that's there. So it's definitely a burgeoning industry. But we have these containers or, Connex boxes that are dropped on site that are filled with basically computer servers that specifically do one task over and over and over again. And those computers all work together in harmony, and they consume a lot of energy. So the idea is you pack these boxes of computers together. You have a lot of energy consumption taking place. We have satellite dishes that essentially send the computations to where they need to be. And then we get compensated for protecting this financial network, which is called the Bitcoin network. And, for us, the way that we look at it is kind of a black box, and it is really weird for most oil and gas producers or anybody in the oil and gas industry when they first hear about it. We've gotten, I think we went live in December, and part of the process was, just having people come by and like kind of stare at it and look and ask questions because it's just this metal container with some fans on the outside, blowing out hot air, and seeing these generators run 24/7. And we just saw a use case where we could help, specifically here in the Bakken, producers deal with the flare problem that they have, and to do it in a much more efficient way than most of the other solutions that are available today.
Did you say Bitcoin?
Bitcoin, yes, sir.
So explain Bitcoin for a second for the average person out there. I know a lot of people have heard of it, but just kind of maybe a 30-second elevator pitch type of a scenario of what Bitcoin is.
Absolutely. So Bitcoin was invented about 10 years ago by a pseudonymous inventor called Satoshi Nakamoto. We don't know who he is. No one has ever figured it out. He essentially wrote a white paper in response to the financial meltdown in 2008. That was kind of his white paper, his thesis. And he said, banks shouldn't have the ability to ruin people's lives by, essentially inflating money and kind of a lot of like what we're seeing right now. And so he created this as a kind of a test case, and it kind of took on a life of its own. And he let it out in the wild, and it's basically a peer-to-peer. So between you and me, there's no intermediary. So like if, you wanted to send me PayPal, you could send me PayPal. I could log in, get my PayPal from you, but um, PayPal still has the ability to go in and grab that money from either you or I, even in one of our bank accounts. With Bitcoin, it's kind of like a Swiss, can consider like a Swiss vault in your pocket. Once that value hits your keys, your wallet, your digital wallet, you are the only one that owns the access to that code, and nobody can take it from you. And there's no reverse charges. So that's what it exists as a censorship resistant proof of value.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Bitcoin is a more like a Xerox, and copy machine would be like the industry. So Bitcoin is an actual term, right? Not the industry itself.
Correct. Sometimes you'll hear the term, and I've heard you use it on your podcast, blockchain technology. So the underlying technology of Bitcoin is the blockchain. That's this database that is essentially what all of our computers are doing. They're checking this database over and over because it's freely available for everyone to be able to audit, to make sure that there's no funny business going on.
And I tell you, I think it is the wave of the future. I'm even seeing like there's some sort of new program that gets you paid 3 days before apparently you can get paid with your direct deposit, and I'm going, oh, that's what blockchain is and Bitcoin, right? Where it's immediate. It's done. It's done. Isn't that kind of the concept, that when the contract is done, you don't have to wait on receivables and all that other stuff? It just happens.
Yeah, so I mean, payment-wise, I would say settlement-wise, it's pretty close to instantaneous.
Yeah.
There is a couple-minute, period where everything is kind of confirming, but once it's confirmed, there's no going back.
Yeah.
And you got it in your, it's in your possession within maybe 15 minutes, and then there's, and I've seen people send amounts. I think there was a transaction the other day of like a $40 billion transaction that was sent for less than 70 cents. And it was in someone else's wallet within 5 minutes. So imagine trying to send a $40 billion wire and how long that would take.
Right. Yeah. The thing that I'm trying to wrap my mind around more than anything, is that what I'm hearing is that these little black boxes essentially can create Bitcoin or create some sort of digital currency,
correct,
value out of the flared natural gas or the controlling of the emission management of the natural gas. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, explain that to me, because that is so bizarre to me. Because I read about this in Canada a few years ago, and I know what's going on. I just don't understand it. And you don't have to give away your proprietary secret by any means, but I'm sure there's a dumbed down version somewhere.
Well, really, it involves incentives, right? Bitcoin mining is very similar to the oil and gas industry, as it really is ruthless capitalism. And so there's a race for people who are involved in this industry to find the cheapest, most scalable, reliable power they can, because the lower you get that number and the more scale that you get, the greater the chances of you being able to mine Bitcoin very cheaply and more efficiently than anyone else out there doing it. So you've got this constant push of capitalism trying to innovate to find the best ways to actually mine it. And so, typically for the first 6 or 7 years of Bitcoin, at least the first 3 years, most people did it in their house. You could actually mine Bitcoin on your laptop. Mm-hmm. And then as competition started heating up, you started to see the shift to specific types of computing devices that would do it. And now we're in a stage where we've got large data centers, in more, I would say, like a traditional data center warehouse model, where you'll see them stuffed to the gills with these things, but they're on grid power. And so there's certain, whether limitations from a regulatory perspective or people don't want them there. Now we're seeing people go into, what we're doing with the oil and gas industry and saying, hey, you've got all this pent up, free energy that's literally just being vented out of the ground or being flared in most of the cases in the Bakken. And we come along and say, hey, we can actually turn that molecule into an electron, which will then essentially provide our business for us. So we come alongside, we take the gas in a very, we don't require a lot of, I would say, overhead for that to happen. We just simply use a generator that's used on probably 90% of the other wells that are out here. And then we plug our box into those generators. And as long as the gas is free flowing and somewhat cleaned up, we can pretty much stay on 24/7.
This is absolutely incredible to me, the whole concept of this, and I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around it. And
it's quite a wormhole.
Well, it is, and I don't know how deep you want to get with the wormhole, but I'm going to start shallow here, okay? I like to wade in the shallow end for a little bit before I get into. I can get deep in the deep end, but I understand I lose people pretty quick. So let's start in the shallow end here. Let's say I'm an operator. You deal with operators, right? Like the oil companies? Sir. Okay. I imagine you'll deal with anybody that'll give you money, but those prime prospects are probably the oil companies. So let's say, oil company ABC calls you and says, I want to know about this Bitcoin and stuff, this black box you have. Explain to me how you're going to make me money, son.
Well, I think right now what we're trying to do is we're still in the experimentation stage to understand if it can make money out here. So no one understood the amount of downtime or anything like that. Whereas in a typical setup, we can go in and plug in and we know our stuff's going to run 24/7. So for us, I think what we've been trying to do is, and I think this goes probably pretty similar with the other folks that are doing this out there right now, is we're trying to get as much data as we possibly can into the oil and gas producers' hands to determine if this is a viable solution for them to use in the future. Because in theory, they will be the ones in a year or two from now who will be the largest of these operators in the world once they understand the economics behind it. So, but it's kind of like leading a horse to water. You really got to, it's definitely a good old boys network, and this is kind of weird to them, and at least initially. And so it's as simple as just getting it on site and showing that it works. And once they hear it, they see it, they get reports with their gas consumption reports coming back every day that we're doing exactly what we said we were going to do. Then I think that wormhole gets deeper, because then they start saying, oh, well, how much money are you making off of this? And how do you guys calculate, your profitability? And then there's aspects of how do you deal with this from a perspective of can you short this? Can you treat this like like you would a natural gas liquid? So there's all of those types of conversations that are unique to oil and gas that we're having that we didn't even realize we were going to be able to have at this point. So it's very much, early stages, wild west type thing.
I love trying to go back as far as I can and take a look at the history behind things and try to take a step back. And I always joke with people, I'm a Libra, so I take a topic
same.
Oh, okay. So basically, you understand what I assume you understand what I'm talking about. Is you'll take a topic and you'll bat it back and forth like a game of mental ping pong till it's water vapor. It's like you go back and forth like the scales do. It doesn't mean you're necessarily accepting it, but your mind goes through the different back and forth. And when I look at what you're doing here, I think back to what I was always told about the origin of money. And the word currency comes from a bank, the river and the flow of energy. And money is nothing more than energy. And so when you look at currency and the Egyptians who invented currency with actually the word, I don't want to get too much into it, but there's a certain god that if you spell the name and you put the double S and the I together, it actually creates the dollar sign. And when you look at the word bank with the river banks, they control the currency of money and they direct the currency of money. So when you think about currency and money as energy, I understand completely what you're doing. And I get the whole thing. And when you can convert energy into digital currency, it makes total sense to me. But I don't think the average person looks at it in that existential way. And that's getting into the deep end, my friend.
Absolutely. That's one of our taglines on our website is Bitcoin equals the currency of energy. So we think that way as well. And for us, that's why we literally are just trying to look at this as a flare mitigation kind of angle right now, because it does take a while to kind of wrap your head around it and to become more comfortable. Now, when Bitcoin first started out, it traded at a couple cents and took years and years and years for it to become acceptable or an accepted traded, commodity. But within the past 2 to 3 years, you've seen the value go up. I'm sure people remember during the top of 2017 where Bitcoin reached $20,000 per Bitcoin. Right now, it's around $7,000. So, just in the last 10 years, it's gone from pennies to $7,000 or up to 20 and down to 7. So there's definitely some inherent value there. And I believe most of that value is in the amount of resources people invest in to protect it, which ultimately is protected by the amount of energy that these servers are consuming. So it's a very symbiotic relationship that it has with energy.
I think it's absolutely incredible because to me it's the evolution of money. Again, you go back to the currency, the original time, and some people argue that the original currency and money, the reason that they used the river was because the person that had basically controlled the distribution supply chain was the person that understood how to navigate the river, and that allowed them the advantage to have a bartering system, because our currency is really nothing more than a bartering system.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as you flash forward, backed by gold, yada yada, you take a look at paper dollars. I think it says right on the paper dollars it's a promissory note or something like that. And so I'm not trying to get into a Federal Reserve conspiracy thing. I'm not trying to get into a political argument. What I'm trying to say is that what a dollar is a promissory note. And it's the promise that that person that has that promissory note is going to utilize their energy in order to give you what you want for that promissory note. And now you flash forward to the digital currency. I remember the Super Bowl ad where there was everybody was partying in line at this deli or this coffee shop and swiping their Visa card. It was a Visa ad, and they're swiping their card, and all of a sudden, the clunky guy with cash comes, and it just stops the party. The music stops. It's like the record screeches, the whole deal. I got a couple texts, and they said, well, cash is done. So digital currency is the future. And to me, what you're talking about is really one of these kind of gold mining type of where it's picking and mining new digital currency. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yeah, and I would just say that, with the oil and gas folks that we're working with, there is this kind of hurdle that we have to get over from, just an educational standpoint, where if they wanted to invest in these solutions themselves and utilize their own gas, they could potentially never, ever have to touch Bitcoin if they didn't want to. The way that the markets work currently is that at the end of every day, or even near instantaneously, they could trade out to US dollars. So if they're thinking about it from perspective of how they would essentially just flow into a pipeline, and they get their 30, 45, their net type payments, they could theoretically just say, no, actually, I'd like my payment at the end of the day in US dollar for what I earned from my box. And many folks operate in that way.
I just see this as the future, and not only the present, because it's happening presently, but this is the future, and this is a great solution to emission management. Now, it's not going to be the end all to be all, is it? I mean, they're not talking about turning the flaring issue overnight, but this is one of those innovative solutions that is going to be part of be part of the all the above, right? That's kind of the idea behind this, is that this is going to be part of a bigger plan in terms of
I,
reducing emissions?
I would say that it's at least on the playing field now. We've had a couple of conversations, and I know some other folks are working on similar projects too, who are working with research departments in the area to validate exactly what we're doing. So, yeah, I think once there's some more third-party, peer-reviewed type studies that are out there that kind of demystify what's going on, I would think that you'll start to see a lot more adoption, because what you're doing at that point is you're actually creating a subsidy to deal with the flaring issue at that point, because then there's actual a real value to say, oh, actually I can turn, typically, price of per MCF is in the $1.70-ish range. You typically see, even on down months, anywhere from 5 to 10x that in terms of the value that we can turn gas into Bitcoin.
Well, I think this is, like I said, one of the reasons why I'm glad you came on the program is to educate people, because personally, I'll make a prediction right now that cash is going to be almost next to gone in the next year and a half. And part of it's going to be what's going on right now with the coronavirus pandemic, the COVID shutdown. There's going to be a transition into digital currency at a faster rate than would have happened otherwise. And that's just because nobody can go anywhere to shop. So they're being trained to use digital currencies. So have you thought of that at all? How this is probably going to really benefit a lot of what you guys are doing in terms of the direction that really the world is going?
Yeah, I mean, the world is definitely going to, or is moving in that direction. I think what sets Bitcoin specifically apart from, let's say PayPal or Venmo or any of these other, more centralized digital transactions is the fact that you cannot be censored from it. Via political correctness or any type of political pressure, no one can stop you from sending a transaction to another address. And so I think in that scenario, it's going to become a very interesting, this is just my philosophical, take on it, is that it will become a very powerful tool for from a free speech component, where people will store their value because they know that they can't be censored in that way. I mean, right now you have literally banks essentially not allowing to do business with certain folks because they have specific political leanings as far as businesses and stuff like that. So that's the difference with Bitcoin, is that you cannot censor it.
That's interesting. I never thought of that angle before, because that is an issue where you're having a lot of banks that are pressured right now to drop their backing and financing of fossil fuels. That's
Absolutely.
a legitimate thing. And if this is a alternative for financing, this is going to be huge.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go down too down like this conspiratorial or global, political realm, but there are nation states right now who do have sanctions against them, who I know for a fact, and there's been published reports that are mining Bitcoin at very large industrial rates. Tens of megawatts worth of power to mine Bitcoin, specifically to get around some of these types of restrictions on them being able to do currency, to do transactions.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And folks, you're witnessing it right before your eyes. And I remember telling somebody Bitcoin 5 years ago, I said, well, as soon as they get an ATM, let me know. Because my thing with Bitcoin was it needs to get more mainstream and it needs to be more accepted. And Bitcoin is digital currency to me. They're kind of like the Xerox of I mean, when somebody says Xerox me a copy, what they mean is make me a photocopy, please. Or when they say give me a Kleenex, they mean tissue. And Bitcoin was like that. You know, they were first in and they got that. But that is where we're going, folks. And it might be called PayPal or Venmo, like you said, but it is a digital currency that is basically taking over. And I just gotta ask the question: Is this basically going to be the new currency? In your prediction, like when you take a look at ruples and dollars and yen and all that different stuff, do you see where maybe the Venmo, the PayPal, or the Bitcoin is going to be kind of the global currency?
I do think that is the ambition behind the originators' desire to create it, was
Okay.
for an alternative. I would say this, though, that I see it more as a universal store of value. So almost consider it more like a digital form of gold. So I could see people moving their wealth into this to kind of, either shelter themselves or to have to make it portable. I think with capitalism, there needs to be. I don't think it works as good as a dollar from like the frictionless standpoint, at least currently. That's my own
Digital
take.
capitalism. Interesting. You got my mind going a couple different directions right now. I'm thinking of a Second Life site and digital capitalism. Darn it. All right, we got it. We're getting too deep now here, folks. All right, we better get back into the shallow end here. So you're currently working with some customers, and I don't necessarily expect you to name their names or anything along those lines, but go ahead and give yourself a plug and explain what you can do and how you're helping some companies out there in Shale Play USA.
Yeah, absolutely. We are working with I would say, a pretty decent sized oil and gas producer in the Bakken, definitely top 5 or so, who saw an opportunity to basically invest in determining if this could be a potential avenue. And let me be clear, their focus was to do this as a way to validate a possible flare mitigation component to it. So it wasn't pitched to them as like, here, you can make this magical internet money. It was simply a decision of, hey, this actually can consume gas. You can take our gas, it can convert that into energy, and therefore we can essentially use this wasted resource right on our well pads. So we're doing that right now for our customer, and I know that there's a number of other of our competitors who, I wouldn't even consider them competitors. There's guys that are trying to do who believe in what we're doing as well, and they're trying to make a dent in this as well. And they do believe it. They do. I want to say this most importantly is the reason why we could have gone and got cheap power from a number of different sources. So there is a draw for us specifically because we do believe that it's a national security element. Like, we want there to be a lot of power used in the Bitcoin network here in the United States. And then secondarily, we do believe that there's and I've heard you talk, ad nauseum during your shows about this black eye in the oil and gas industry with the flaring problem. And this is a solution to it. So that's how we see things.
And that's why I talk about it as ad nauseum, because not only do I talk about it, the regulators and the oil industry is the one that set the bar.
And the Gretas do as well.
And so all I'm doing is saying, look, here's another company that can help you be a part of the solution. And I get it. Not everybody has the finances to do it. But let me tell you, man, I've seen the government subsidies be handed out for a lot of different things. And that's why I've been an advocate that why don't we transition or shift some of those solar and wind subsidies over to the natural gas side of things, because we could solve this flaring problem in 5 years, because there are so many smart, clever capitalists like yourself out there. And then you got the other side of guys side of things. They're trying to do power generation and sell the batteries on the open market and methane and all these different things. So there's a ton of little solutions that'll be part of the problem. And I just see where just a little shift of subsidies would take care of it, And anyways, that's just me, because I listen to what the people say, and I try to take a look at if they're hitting the benchmarks that they're saying not me. They. And if they're not hitting their benchmarks, well, maybe it's not working out. Maybe we should look at some other ways, like the Bitcoin guys. Like I used to love giving your example. Like, you got these crazy guys out there mining Bitcoins at the well site. Other guys, 6 months from their family checking monitors at well sites, living in shipping containers and stuff like that. People don't get that. That's real. And so I think those crazy guys should be rewarded. That's all. So anyway, I appreciate you listening to the podcast, by the way. That's nice of you.
Absolutely.
Hey, I did want to ask you one thing, though, is I've been, one thing another that I've been very much vocal about is I get that, the oil industry ebbs and flows and the economy goes up and down, but at the end of the day, there's still a ton of money out there. In fact, there's more money today than there was yesterday because Congress just printed, another $1 billion or $1 trillion. So there's more money on the planet than before. Now, I get that less people have more money, but there's still the same amount of money. So you got to make a better steak sandwich and you got to build a better mousetrap. Okay? That's just kind of the way it goes. Is what you're talking about going to bridge that kind of financial gap and maybe allow some people to do some sort of international trade a lot easier? Because, there's importing and exporting laws that are really beyond a small business owner. But I see the day where this digital currency can kind of accelerate some international trade. Am I in the ballpark there?
Well, that's one of the biggest use cases for Bitcoin currently is overseas payments, whether it's, people who are here sending money back to, their family in a different country, or in business environments. Bitcoin is absolutely used as a way to basically replace the wire transfer system.
That's how I kind of looked at it, too. It was a more sophisticated wire transfer system that was going to be accepted like a Visa, MasterCard day to day, but now we're talking about just eliminating borders, if you will, and countries and everything. So anyway, okay, great. Very fun talk today, by the way. I didn't expect to go in the deep end. I used to do a show back in my former days. I hosted a 3-hour nighttime show, and I was the lead-in to the Conspiracy Alien Overnight Show. And so the last hour of my program, I would get into some fringe topics. So I love it. Anytime anybody wants to talk conspiracy, I'm like, ooh, fun.
Oh, my.
Well, it doesn't mean I believe in them, but I always like talking about it because it really expands the mind. And you said you're a Libra, so I think you understand what I mean when I say bubblegum for the mind. Sometimes it's just fun to chew it around,
Absolutely. And, just thinking about like where we are in the current reality of the world we're living in and having to wear a mask and not being able to go places, those things would have been looked at as conspiracies years ago if you would have talked about it. And this is what we're dealing with.
No, you're right. You're exactly right. In fact, the Crude Life's motto in the beginning of 2020 was ready for anything. And we were talking more about, 16-year-old girls with Asperger's being used as political weapons and using children to get banks to stop funding petroleum-based companies and things like that, where at the end of the day, it was, are you ready for a shutdown? I mean, we didn't even see that coming because ready for anything, we actually meant ready for anything. And one thing, by the way, to give ourselves a plug, as long as I have an opportunity here, our business was ready for 2020, and we were ready to have to go, from our house and that sort of thing, because we did expect this, not to this level, but we expected some shenanigans and we expected some dalliance because capitalism has been under attack for a long time. And the only industry left, in my opinion, that actually allows capitalism to work is the oil and gas industry. Every other industry is so subsidized or controlled. And the example and you're a technology guy. I don't know how much time you got here because this could open up another 5 to 10 minutes. But the example I give on capitalism all the time is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs had to get an okay from Hewlett-Packard before he could start Apple because Steve Wozniak worked part-time for Hewlett-Packard. I believe it was Hewlett-Packard back in the 70s. And back then, they had their intellectual property so guarded that part-time employees had to go and ask for an okay before they could go start their own thing. Now, luckily for Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, Hewlett-Packard was not into that existential view and that 5,000-foot view. Otherwise, Apple would have never started. People forget that's how controlled a lot of industries are today. Do you know what I mean by that, sir?
Oh, absolutely. I remember reading the book of like how Bill Gates got started and how he took the other route as far as being a little bit more cutthroat with some of those the abilities to control some of the intellectual property. And specifically, I think he got Steve pretty good.
Steve, my understanding is Bill Gates basically did what was known as reverse engineering. And now Steve Jobs tried to do it too. Don't get me wrong, because Xerox ended up being the loser in this. Because if Xerox doesn't invent the mouse and the user interface, the graphic user interface, neither Microsoft or Apple have that idea. And that was kind of what was so interesting about it is that Bill Gates basically was able to reverse engineer and pirate what Xerox had and Apple tried to steal legally, if that makes sense. Apple tried the sophisticated legal route. Bill Gates just went in and said, yeah, let's do this, send it over to China, have them do it in a different country, and then we'll turn around and do it this way. Which, again, I'm not complaining about at all. I'm just saying that's what happened, and that's the world we live in. And, again, at the end of the day, the oil and gas industry, in my opinion, is the only industry left where an average Joe, an average Jamoke, who may or may not have a high school education, can take a look at this vibrating tube every day for 2 years working an oil and gas rig and say, you know what? I can get that tube to vibrate twice as fast for less cost, and within a year, he's a millionaire. I don't know if that can happen in any other industry anymore.
That's a great point. Absolutely. And I just wanted to thank you too, because we got into this market kind of by chance. One of the guys who works on our team lives in Utah, and he comes from an oil and gas background and happened to know the owner of a water treatment plant who focuses on oil wells. And so we reached out to him and said, hey, we got this wild idea. We'd like to, we noticed you have a flare stack. And they have specific flaring caps tied to, to what they do there. So we said, hey, if we can make that headache go away for you, could we come and hook up a generator to it? And it was very much a similar scenario where we were trying to help make his business a little bit more efficient. And that was my first kind of entry into this. And then once we got introduced to the company that we were working with currently in North Dakota, I wanted to consume as much info as I could about what was going on. And I stumbled upon your podcast back in August of this past year. And, I'm just very thankful for the type of folks that you have on and the amount of education. And most importantly, your attitude of it's like you can tell you're always trying to lift up the industry, which is good because, there's a number of people that can complain all the time, but, yours is very different from a lot of the other podcasts that are out there.
Well, I appreciate that. And if you want to let me know your address, I'll send you a check because I've never gotten an endorsement like that
How about
before.
I just leave my URL for the site?
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. That's nice for you to know because sometimes I get some emails that don't say that. They say the exact opposite. One guy called me I can't even use the word, but LIB was at the end of it, and I can't even clean it up. Actually, it wouldn't even be a sentence. Never mind. So I get emails that I can't clean up or they won't be sentences. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. Yeah. Well, go ahead and give yourself a plug. I do know who the operator is that you're working for, and yeah, it might be one of the top 5 in the Bakken, but it's definitely, probably one of the top 3 in the country. So, you are working with one of the major operators, so you are legit. You do know what you're talking about. You've got something that is showing promise. So if somebody would like to, reach out to you and maybe take a look at your numbers or talk to you a little bit more about it, go ahead and give them your information.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jason. The website is www.gam.ai. and we kind of affectionately refer to ourselves as GAM, for Great American Mining. So if you'd like to go to our website, there's a contact button on there that immediately goes to my email. There's plenty of information on the site as well for oil and gas producers to get a little bit more familiar with how we're trying to help them.